What is going on, everybody? The Fantasy Birds are back with some more Dynasty fantasy football, getting closer and closer to the start of the 2023 regular season. Last week, we did guys that we wanted to be trading for. This week, I'm doing guys I want to be trading away before the season starts and these guys' values start diminishing. Let's not waste your time. Let's hop right into 5 guys I want to be trading away in Dynasty fantasy football. The first guy on this list is unfortunately going to be Deebo Samuel, the wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers. Samuel is actually our number one must-avoid wide receiver in the 2022 fantasy football season. We're very happy about that selection because Deebo actually only had one top 10 wide receiver finish on a weekly basis during that year. A couple of reasons added to this. Our reasoning was that Trey Lance was going to vulture a lot of the rushing upside around the end zone. That didn't end up happening. Trey Lance actually got injured, but a lot of that same reasoning is going to translate into the 2023 season. If Trey Lance is going to be the starting quarterback, he's going to vulture all the rushing touchdown upside for these wide receivers, running backs in this Shanahan offense. But Samuel, a down year in 22. He did miss 4 games during the season, but Samuel's got a history of missing games. Health problems have always been a problem for him, even dating back to his days in college at South Carolina. Struggles to stay healthy at times and actually finished as the wide receiver 40 in half PPR leagues. This year, he's going around wide receiver 17, so this ADP is reflective on people expecting Samuel to bounce back to his 2021 year and not more similar with his previous season in 2022. I think there's a number of reasons concerned. We already talked about Trey Lance vulturing inside the red zone, but also Christian McCaffrey gets dealt to this team mid-year last season. McCaffrey kind of does exactly what Samuel does around the line of scrimmage. Samuel's routes are going to be more short, closer to the line of scrimmage like we talked about. So is Christian McCaffrey. He kind of adopted that Deebo Samuel role down the stretch of the 2023 season. And that's a big reason why I'm concerned for Deebo and why I want to be trading him away right now while people are still expecting Deebo to be Deebo this upcoming year. I'm not saying Samuel's going to be a terrible pick in fantasy, but at wide receiver 17 in Dynasty, I think there are much better, younger options to pivot to than a guy I believe who is descending in fantasy with a quarterback in Lance who doesn't really aid in Deebo's production like a Jimmy Garoppolo or a Brock Purdy did. Those guys, those statues in the pocket, sit back, get the ball to the playmakers, really much more profitable for these Deebo Samuels, George Kittles, and Christian McCaffreys. McCaffrey, we know, dynamic running back. They go ahead and trade for him. He's going to get his in this offense. As long as he's healthy, McCaffrey's going to be the number one guy. I think Deebo's definitely going to play second fiddle to McCaffrey in this offense. And with the rushing upside not there for Deebo like it was in years past without a Christian McCaffrey type dynamic running back in the backfield, this is really a guy I want to be moving off of right now while the value is still there in some people's opinions. So unfortunately, we loved the player a couple of years back, a league-winning player in the 2021 season. I think it's time to jump off the ship before it's too late for Deebo Samuel heading into 2023. The second guy I want to be fading right now in Dynasty is going to be Isaiah Pacheco, running back for the Kansas City Chiefs. 7th round rookie running back who has an amazing end to the season in Kansas City. Really a huge factor in that Super Bowl run for the Chiefs. But I'm not ready to say that Pacheco is going to be the lead workhorse running back in Kansas City in the 2023 season. We know Clyde Edwards-Helaire dealing with injuries at the end of the season. Obviously, Clyde hasn't lived up to the first-round running back capital that he was given. But still, Clyde is no slouch. He's going to be back this season. He's looking good in OTAs. He's going to be a part of this offense. Whether it's a huge part or not, we don't know yet, but it's still going to be a part. And for a guy in Pacheco who didn't already have that huge chunk of the offense sliced out for him in Kansas City, this is a guy who only had over 50% snap share in 2 games last year. Those snap percentages were at 51 and 56%. So he's not on the field a ton in Kansas City, but when he is, he's very productive. I'm not ready to say Pacheco's the new guy in Kansas City. With McKinnon coming back, re-signing with the Chiefs, that's a big part here. He's still going to be a passing down scat back for this Mahomes-led team. So a 3-headed monster in Kansas City. So I don't want to label Pacheco as a dynasty young cornerstone asset in dynasty fantasy football when these other guys are going to play a huge role in this offense. Andy Reid loves to spread the ball around. With a guy like Patrick Mahomes, you're not going to be running the ball a ton because really you want the ball in Mahomes' hand as much as possible. And guys like Clyde Edwards-Helaire and McKinnon just work a lot better out of the shotgun than a Pacheco, more of a downhill runner. Still has some upside in the receiving game, but not like those other 2 backs. So if people are valuing Pacheco as this lead back in Kansas City that's going to be attached to Mahomes, definitely a guy I want to be trading because I don't expect him to have any sort of dominant carry percentage or snap percentage in that backfield as long as Andy Reid and Mahomes are there. I think they're just going to be way too spread out to rely on one guy in that backfield. So that's why I'm trading Pacheco and getting a pretty decent haul for somebody excited about the Chiefs and coming off that Super Bowl run. The next guy on this list, going to be a sad scene here, Josh Jacobs. I love Josh Jacobs. Took me to the championship in my high-stakes redraft league last year. Such an amazing season for Jacobs. However, we got to look closer at the numbers that Jacobs was producing last season. Last year, Raiders didn't have that great of a season. They benched Derek Carr at the end of the year. In the games that the Raiders lost, losing efforts, losing game script, Jacobs was only averaging 12 fantasy points per game in half PPR leagues. Opposed to that, on the entire season average, he was averaging nearly 18 fantasy points per game. So a 6 points per game discrepancy between total games and strictly games that he's losing. This is telling me with such a gap between those two statistics that Jacobs is really game script dependent. In games that the Raiders are trailing, coming from behind, he's really not a part of this offense. He still is, for the most part, a 3-down back, but he's not a huge part of the passing game, so he can be game scripted out of some of these games for the Raiders. And this is what I want to look at. The Raiders are actually only a 6.5 over-under win total this upcoming season to the Vegas sports books. They're projected to finish last place in their division, so I'm expecting a lot of come from behind, trailing game scripts for the Raiders this year, especially losing Derek Carr in the offseason. Jimmy Garoppolo comes in, and now there's reports that the Raiders can cut Garoppolo and not have any sort of penalty, so we don't even know what the quarterback situation is. If this Vegas season turns into a dumpster fire, I don't want Jacobs, who's strictly getting his fantasy production from the ground game, I don't want to be relying on that going forward if this team's going to be trailing and playing from behind for the majority of its games. After the season that Jacobs is coming off of, only a 25-year-old running back, this is a great time to sell him, get a pretty big haul for him. Without a great quarterback and a dynamic offense around him, the Raiders could struggle, and I don't want to be relying on that guy who doesn't have much of a receiving role on the team. So unfortunately, even though he carried me to the championship last year and a lot of other teams, he's one of my main guys that I want to be moving off of in Dynasty Fantasy Football while that price is so high for him. The fourth guy on this list and our third running back, DeAndre Swift, now for the Philadelphia Eagles, gets traded on draft day from the Lions for a late pick in the draft, so not much compensation coming over for the Eagles. The thing I want to look at, this Philadelphia offense is not exactly very friendly to the running back position. It's been 5 years since they've even had a top 12 finish at the running back position in fantasy football. I think that was Jordan Howard when he had a really good year and then completely moved off him in the coming season. So always been a midi approach in Philadelphia, and it's no different this upcoming season in my opinion. You're looking at Rashad Penny they bring in, Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell, and DeAndre Swift, 4 pretty solid backs. I don't know if all are going to make the team, but still, that's a lot of competition for DeAndre Swift. Guys that actually performed very well at the end of last year. Gainwell, one of the more heavily relied upon options on the ground last year. And Swift has not been a dominant ball carrier in his first 3 years in Detroit. I mean, in his 3 seasons in Detroit, he's only had 4 games with 15 or more carries, so he's not really a workhorse back that you're expecting him to be in Philadelphia. And even so, the volume's going to be low there because they're spreading out between 3 different players, maybe even 4. And Jalen Hurts is going to dominate the goal line carries. He's their number 1 rusher inside the 5-yard line. We saw it last year with all those quarterback sneaks and rushes inside when they got close to the end zone. So with the touchdown upside not being a for sure thing for Swift, not to mention the Eagles last season actually the lowest target share to running backs in the entire NFL. They're not dumping in the ball off to these running backs because Jalen Hurts is just taking off and running when he gets in trouble. And why can you blame him? He's one of the most dynamic rushers. Swift, we know he's a very good receiving back. He's going to get a lot of his work through the receiving game in a PPR league. You're relying on those receptions. So with that target share being so low from the Philadelphia offense last season, lowest in the league, like we mentioned, it's not someone I want to be buying into right now in Dynasty attached to this Eagles offense. I think if you can sell him, he's got a big name in fantasy. His last year, he was a second-round pick in most leagues, a young asset at that. Not to mention all the injuries that Swift has had to deal with. This is a guy I really want to be moving on from in Dynasty. I think there's way too many question marks in an offense that's looking to revolve around Jalen Hurts and a committee approach in the backfield. So if you can move on from Swift and get a pretty sizable return, I would be more than happy to do so and move on from the Georgia running back. The last guy on my list today is going to be Darren Waller, the tight end for now the New York Giants. Waller's been a pretty big disappointment the last couple of seasons in Las Vegas after his big breakout campaign a couple of years back. Gets traded to the Giants, but I'm not ready to say that he's going to have a resurgence at age 30. Age 30 season for tight ends don't exactly work out too well. If you take out some of the outliers, I mean, Travis Kelce, maybe one of the best tight ends of all time, he's still looking pretty solid, so I can't use him as an example. But age 30 tight end for an offense in New York that doesn't really throw the ball a ton under Daniel Jones. Like we talked about with the Eagles, Jones looks to run a lot more than you think. So Jones, that offense is going to run around Jones' ability to run and getting the ball to Saquon Barkley, who comes back for the Giants after that playoff run they had last season. Darren Waller was coming to the Giants and there was very little target competition. I'd be all for Waller as a tight end that we can count on in fantasy, but there's so many options to go in a very low passing volume in New York, like we talked about. I mean, you're looking at guys like Wan'Dale Robertson, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins, Jalen Hyatt. All these guys, some of them coming back from injury, I will admit, but still, that's a lot of mouths to feed for a guy like Daniel Jones, who doesn't really throw for 300 yards too often in the NFL. They really like to move the ball very slowly down the field and rely on Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones' legs moving the ball on third down. So Darren Waller is not someone I want to be looking to keep much longer in Dynasty fantasy football, especially at age 30 season. With Darren Waller being such a big name at the tight end position, not many guys you can really rely on. I'm more than happy to move on from Waller for a younger piece. The last guy I want to mention is going to be Tyler Lockett, a guy I want to be moving on very, very desperately. I mean, Lockett, a pretty great season, underrated coming into the 2022 season, has a phenomenal year in Seattle with Geno Smith, who had an unbelievable season, to be quite honest. But they bring in Jackson Smith-Njigba, who's one of my favorite rookies this season, dominant at Ohio State, plays a lot of his snaps out of the slot, which is where Tyler Lockett has a huge number of his targets come from. I think 42% around there is where Tyler Lockett got his targets out of the slot. With those snaps going to the first-round pick, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Lockett's not a guy I want to be relying on. I believe the future of this team is going to be DK Metcalf and JSN. I think Lockett probably won't even be a part of this team after this season. So if you can move on from him now after the year he just had attached to Geno Smith, more than happy to move on from him for whatever sort of deal you can get, because I really do think Lockett, at age 30, we've definitely seen the best of him in the past, and I think his opportunity is honestly behind him now that JSN is going to step into that slot role. So someone I would be more than happy to get rid of off my team. But that's going to wrap up 5 guys I want to be trading right now. Let me know what you think of these guys. Love hearing your guys' opinion on it. Drop a like on this video. I really appreciate the support. Love making these videos. Appreciate you guys watching. See you guys next week with another episode of The Fantasy Birds.